It's now a pleasure for me to introduce Ms. Kate Hammond, partner at the law firm Pierce Atwood and a true leader in global efforts to foster ethics and business integrity from a multi-stakeholder perspective. Kate, we're honored to have you facilitate this forum's second discussion on elevating integrity in health procurement, learnings from the pandemic. Kate, it's great to see you. The floor is yours.
Thanks very much for that warm introduction, Andrew. It's good to be back with everyone. I'd like to thank Brazil for hosting this forum today and tomorrow, and also to congratulate them on signing their consensus framework, which is wonderful to see. I'm very honored to have been invited to moderate this panel of experts. I'm excited to hear from our very experienced thought leaders on the panel. Just to introduce them briefly, we have Director Valentin Diaz Gracia, the National Director of the Supply Center of the National Health Services System, Cenabast, of the Ministry of Health in Chile. Deputy Attorney General Carlos Fonseca Silva from Brazil, who is also a member of the Board of Ethics of the Health Ethics Institute. Patricia Burrell. I'm getting some echo, I apologize for that. CEO and President of Braille Biomedica. Rafael Andreas Diaz Granados, the Executive Director of FIPharma. Such a great group, and thank you all for joining us. So by way of introduction of our panel, many of you know me as a former Department of Justice prosecutor, but before I joined Justice, I was one of the Department of State's anti-corruption leads for the Western Hemisphere, where I had the privilege of being one of the negotiators of the Declaration of Nuevo León at the Special Summit of the Americas in 2004, joining together with the rest of the hemisphere to articulate and commit to ambitious goals in enhancing the transparency and responsiveness of democratic governments to their people, building on the Inter-American Convention Against Corruption, which then was just 5 years old. The declaration also called on the hemisphere to promote quality healthcare for all and to ensure transparency in procurement processes. Today's panel brings those two goals together, ensuring integrity and ethics in healthcare procurement for the benefit of the patients. One of those goals from the Special Summit had two parts. The first was focused on disincentives and the other on incentives. That commitment stated, we pledge to intensify our efforts to combat corruption and other unethical practices in the public and private sectors, strengthening a culture of transparency and ensuring more efficient public management. We have come a long way in advancing the first half of that agenda in healthcare, combating unethical practices, since our meeting in Monterrey, with enforcement and debarment mechanisms that are far more advanced and successful in deterring misconduct. But we are still in the early stages of advancing government's role in strengthening a culture of transparency, also a goal of the Inter-American Convention. The challenges and stresses to healthcare systems throughout the hemisphere posed by the pandemic have made meeting these goals ever more urgent. So our panel today is going to discuss how we best make that pivot and build upon the groundwork enforcement has laid as ethics and integrity systems continue to grow and advance, and encompass a greater range of stakeholders from government and industry to healthcare providers and, of course, to patients. So let's start by looking at the area where we've seen such improvement since Nuevo León, disincentives. So enforcement and prevention have been the primary tool for government in advancing efforts to promote ethics and integrity in health system procurement. The pandemic has also introduced new schemes, and enforcement has been hard pressed in many places to keep up. Enforcement also can never capture the entirety of challenges to integrity in the system and protect patients on a comprehensive basis. So I think, Mr. Deputy Attorney General, what disincentives would you say have been effective or less effective in reducing corruption and strengthening ethical conduct in health procurement?
Hello?
Hello, thank you.
Okay, sorry, let me try in Portuguese. Você me pergunta acerca
So you are asking me
das ações
you are asking me regarding actions that have improved or how we improved enforcement in the fight against corruption. Right, so I would like to, first of all, thank you all for the honor of being here and congratulate the organizers of this event. So right now we have our impressions and our testimony regarding the experience and practice really of integrity during the pandemic. I would say that we have reinforced, we did the enforcement of legislation and of regulations. In fact, it was really an additional effort, especially considering the increase of risks. Our concern was that the risks during the pandemic represent death, more suffering, political unintelligence, and since there was a simplification of processes to facilitate the approvals, the risks have increased. And that therefore created the need of additional efforts in order to comply with legislation and also regulations. The Attorney General Office created a crisis committee which till today monitors all the actions, allowing for articulation of the members of the public ministry throughout Brazil. An articulation not only among members of the public ministry, but as well as an articulation with administrative authorities and also private entities. I'm not sure if I should go on or should wait for another question. What is your suggestion there? I have a few talking points that I would like to address, but should I go on or should I wait for your question?
Well, I think that's thank you very much for that. I think it's a good review of some of the regulatory regimes that have been the most effective. One I'd like to talk about in particular, and I welcome my other panelists to weigh in on this as well. But starting with you, Mr. Deputy Attorney General, the World Bank in particular has been pushing for greater use of debarment or denial of access to procurement systems and cross-debarment across systems in particular as to enforce anti-corruption norms. On the other hand, debarment has collateral consequences, including the loss of access to treatment options for patients. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on whether denial of access to public procurement through debarment or a similar system, do you think that should be a primary tool in this arena? And should that debarment process cross national boundaries? Should, for example, Brazil debar on the basis of an enforcement action in the United States, or should Canada debar on the basis of an action in Chile?
Eu não sei se entendi bem a sua questão.
I'm not sure if I understood really the question, but certainly the Brazilian authorities have tried to establish a process that is fast or faster regarding procurement. And we have also tried to monitor in a more expedite way the opportunities that have raised regarding the need to serve the different healthcare service providers. Of course, there were imperfections in the process, and they continue to occur. It's not really a comfortable situation for us. But Brazil had a very particular situation due to the divergences regarding administrative issues. Brazil is a continental country with different bodies in the federation and the federal and state and municipal governments. And that political situation, the political organization of Brazil represented a challenge, an extra challenge, I would say. I'm not sure if I answered your question, but anyway, we have been trying to diminish these divergences. However, we still have that present among us regarding alignment of different authorities.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Attorney General. I think, Rafael, I think you had a comment?
Yeah, I think one of the challenges when we talk broadly about ethics, and I think we'll talk a little bit about sort of the hammer and the shield, and when do you do something proactively, when do you do something defensively. But when you talk about cross-debarment, one of the challenges, Kate, I think you have is bright line rules sometimes aren't as effective as we would like. And so you can imagine a situation where you really have a bad faith actor, but because they are structured, from a corporate organizational perspective with different legal entities in different countries, the cross-debarment isn't applicable. And at the same time, you can imagine another situation where you've got a good faith actor who, having tripped up on some minutia of a regulatory instance, gets debarred, but then you risk a significant loss of access to a particular product that would be important in the market. So I think one of the things that we need to talk about more broadly is as we push for further distribution or deployment of ethical considerations across the region, is what are the degrees of freedom that we're going to give the different stakeholders, and in particular government entities. One of the challenges that we see as sort of procurement changes from very much a price volume type transaction to something a bit more sophisticated with some of the new therapies that are coming is, instances, and this can happen in Brazil. There's been some legislation that has changed that, here recently, and Oito Meia Meia, even has and allows some possibilities for some flexibility in terms of how the contracting happens. But if you start off an assumption that unless you completely limit the degrees of freedom of the government actor, you're going to end up in a situation of corruption. What it does is it takes off the table a number of win-win scenarios that you could get to if you actually give a bit more discretion to those government actors. So I think that's something that national governments and legislators need to consider. That is, the bright line rule is nice in its simplicity to administer. You were debarred here, therefore you cannot participate. The fact is that oftentimes there are complexities and nuances where I do think having it be part of the consideration. So the technical pliego, the technical bid rules, should contemplate, have you or somebody in your, corporate organization, had an instance of debarment in another jurisdiction, please explain yourself, right? So that it is one of the elements for consideration, but it's not something that automatically excludes somebody because there may be elements there that are important to weigh.
Thank you for that. And I think that leads us well into my next question. And the pharmaceutical, medical device, and other health related industries have done a great deal of work on voluntary codes. And industry, rather than regulatory rules, have driven advances in ethics and integrity in many ways. And the pandemic, of course, has put these sectors, from vaccines to ventilators, in particular, very much at the center of healthcare. So I'd love to hear from you and from Senora Abreu. Deputy Secretary Graves mentioned in his opening remarks, particularly the role of strong regulation in promoting ethics in healthcare. What should the government's role be in promoting and supporting the voluntary efforts of private sector life sciences companies to address ethics more generally and the challenges of the pandemic specifically? Should we go back to more regulation, or can we start moving toward the incentive side? What do you think the best approach there is? Senor Bell, perhaps if you'd like to start.
Okay, I'm very glad to be here. I will speak Portuguese. And my name is Patrícia, meu nome é Patrícia
My
Braille.
name is Patricia Briley, and it's a pleasure to be here to participate in this forum. It is initiatives like this one that change the history of countries and also change society. A government that works towards building a better healthcare system is really like that, one that involves the unity of the public and private sectors, associations, building together a new present and a new future. The framework that we signed today is really important for that such development. I am the president of a medium-sized Brazilian company that manufactures devices for vascular and cardiac surgeries. So it's really good to be here and be the voice of small and medium companies that want to and are able to be involved in the process of the development and organization of what we call integrity and compliance towards the most important thing, which is ethics in relationships, aiming at the primary goal, which is the health of patients. Without that thought, we would be harming those who are the focus of our work, which are patients. I would also say that this is not a very friendly environment for small businesses, because we have to compete and work with systems and legislations that are very robust. But we do not want to be companies that win RFPs just because we have the lowest price or because we have a certain debatable conduct. No, and I know a lot of them, and I am part of a few associations that show us. And for the most people, it's very important to debate and address this problem. We have been seeing here in Brazil actions and bodies that work towards the dissemination and facilitation so that this category of companies is increasingly transparent and work in an ethical manner. The creation of the Institute Ethics in Health is a landmark in Brazil. The Institute Ethics in Health helps us to self-regulate, to look at each other and write norms and guidelines that provide orientation about how we should act and be in search for standardization and ethical excellence. The larger public is also aware of that and created programs to recognize companies of all types of sizes and areas of market that might be examples and role models for others. I'm talking about the Pro Ethics program from the Attorney General Office and the Quali S, which is a program from the Institute Ethics in Health. So companies voluntarily submit to training and audits so that they can find out the level of their control systems and how they are doing in order to be able to consolidate and increasingly improve their compliance systems, looking at ethics and the patients and a society that is more just and more balanced. We, as small and medium enterprises that are part of this system, we still have a lot to learn and a lot to grow, but we are willing to do that and participate in a correct, transparent, and safe way. We want to be part of that change in society. Brazil has been facing several problems during the pandemic. There are serious problems that have to be addressed. But I have been in the market for a long time, and I've been sensing an improvement, especially regarding vascular and cardiac surgery. The change in public procurement is visible, is notable, but I would like to close with an expression that I like very much. We are little ants, and together we create this movement. We may not give up. We cannot stop. Because if we just take a nap, corruption crawls back in. So we have to be vigilant. We have to be alert so that we can build a more just society. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Rafael, I know you have some thoughts on this as well.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna riff off of what Patricia was just talking about. And first of all, congratulations again to Brazil, to the Instituto Ética de Saúde. Great efforts there. And Kate, you were asking about the role of government when you've got these type of voluntary interactions. And I would say that there's three different ways in which you have to think about it. The first one is there's a constitutional responsibility in many of the countries in Latin America with respect to ethics, particularly when it comes to public purchasing. And as a matter of fact, public purchasing in many of our countries is a very significant part of the GNP. And so when you sort of ask, should governments be involved in these kind of voluntary associations, oftentimes they need to wear a hat of purchaser, right? And so when you think about, what are the different elements that participate, and I think Valentin can speak to this in a second, when you think about the amount of purchasing power that is in the hands of public officials, and you think about a consensus framework that wants to bring together, we all have the same goals. At FIFARMA, we always talk about patient outcomes and sustainable health systems, right? And when you bring a consensus framework together, you want the manufacturers, you want the patients, you want the providers, you want the payers, and oftentimes the government actually plays roles in multiple of those, and therefore should actually be an active participant. And then the other thing that I would say is that while we're all on this webinar because we firmly believe in the power of consensus frameworks, in the power of bringing industry players together to drive a more level playing field, a more ethical space, we also know that there are instances where, from an enforcement perspective, things do fail. And so the government needs to be there as a backstop, because the credibility of some of these efforts is not dependent on when the signature and the celebration happens. It's dependent on what the reaction is when you've got the folks that are free riding or violating the norms. Everybody's aware of that, and yet, if something doesn't happen, then the entire, edifice sort of crumbles because of lack of credibility. I ran a very big business in Mexico many years ago, tens of thousands of employees, billions of dollars in revenue. And I remember talking to other actors in the business space, who were, saying that it would be very difficult to get, people to align against corruption just because it was so endemic. And I said, in my 40 plus years of traveling to the US, I've never had a single person say, who cares about the visa? I'll just slip the guy a 50 at the Miami airport. I mean, the systems are built in such a way, and people can actually operate when you've got robust systems. And so making sure that you've got all of the elements, all of the stakeholders coming together in the consensus framework, but then having that backstop of enforcement, I think is going to be the ideal virtuous cycle. But because I think, government plays such an important role from an acquisition perspective, from a payer perspective, they will always have to be present.
Thank you. I think some really important points about the fact that you can't just do away with the disincentives, but that following the industry lead on incentives really has some benefits for government as well. And to date, I think international efforts to promote ethics and integrity have focused very much on the system side, whether it's OECD, Inter-American Convention, Special Summit, focusing on things like open online bidding and pricing transparency. Many countries have had success in building regulatory side protections into the approval processes. We heard a lot about that from the prior panel. In order to prevent corruption in procurement systems in this essential sector of the hemisphere's economies. And enforcement mechanisms have been an important backup to the creation of those transparent systems. But not all countries have the enforcement infrastructure or the regulatory infrastructure to make disincentives successful alone. And Director Diaz Gracia, I think, could you tell us a bit about what Cenabast has done in terms of procurement to help ensure transparency and a level playing field, and what you're doing to, for example, create a race to the top rather than a race to the bottom in terms of ethics and integrity?
Buenos días, Kate.
Good morning, Kate. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to talk to you guys in this international panel. And first of all, I would like to say that I don't have any interest conflict. I don't have any conflict of interest. A purchase and public contract system that makes sure we have high ethics standards, transparency standards, and priority standards should be one of the main goals that we see for each sovereign country. In Chile, this system started 20 years ago with a regulatory consensus specific that has a lot of specific pillars: the transparency of all public purchases, the efficiency of public spending, and the universal access. And it's valid to say it's not necessary to be in Chile to be able to sell to the Chile state. Anyone, anywhere in the world can sell to Chile, and not discriminating anyone, and whether that's big companies or small, medium enterprises. This system has had a constant improvement throughout all of these years, especially with information channels for the providers, the manufacturers, and the general public as well. So the citizens can participate in all the opportunities for contracts that the state is given. We favor electronic commerce as well for over 20 years, and Chile has been buying through electronic markets for 20 years. And we do push the use of the internet. We have incentives for that. We've had many years in telework, so we've been following the trend with that. And we've been using the different platforms as well of the companies that actually have, the state of Chile as the provider. Having a public purchase system which is open and which has clear rules can improve the company's image a lot. And that is always important for all the decisions of commerce and purchasing. Making sure that we have transparency through a system which is legitimized at the moment, where all the irregularities are the reception. So that is very important. Reaching a point where the deviations are the receptions. In terms of credibility of the state, in part of citizenship, and also because of the patients that are going to receive, whether it's medication or just healthcare, showing that public resources are used in an efficient manner. So we have invited and we have identified 100 components, 100 fundamental players in a public purchasing system which is efficient. First, it's a direction, an organism, which is potent, strong, that is going to have regulation and will standardize purchasing and contracts. The second, more potent, more strong for the independence of public powers and economic powers that is going to check or create a fiscalization for all organs that are in the state. A third relevant player are public services. So all public services need to be subjected to these norms, and whether they're buying medication, they're buying arms, or they're hiring just a construction work for railroads or highways. So everything needs to be regulated. The most important are our providers, so the pharma industry, the commerce industry, that they have codes of ethics that are accepted by the citizenship, and most importantly, that they actually comply with that code of ethics, especially during the pandemic, where we have seen cases where they were away from the code of ethics. And lastly, we have identified a sixth actor that we think is the most relevant during the social media age, which is the citizenship. So citizenship as power of, represented through organizations which are non-government related, or through free press, which can denounce. We have seen that the main corruption cases that we have seen, collusions, bad practices for public actors as well as providers, they have been denounced either by the press or by the people. So we believe that this set of things are going to help the ethics, are going to help transparency, specifically when we talk about the health sector. Kate?
Thank you very much, Director. I think I'm going to ask a question now that I welcome input from all of you, which is, should procurement systems be moving to something more formal to create a race to the top, such as assessing ethics and integrity programs as a formal part of the bid and tender process, for example, as part of the technical score, the way some systems evaluate professional education? Should it be part of the regulatory approval process, such as you must have a code of conduct that's monitored over time? Should there be an incentivization process that is built into the procurement system? I'm not sure who wants to take that on.
Maybe I'll take a first crack at it, Kate. I think so. I think it's the natural evolution of the work that we've been talking about during the course of the panel. What I would say is, you'd want to be careful because, and I'm sure Patricia can add more color to this. You don't want to create sort of hurdles for access from a broad universe of potential partners in the system. That is, you don't want to create such a burdensome set of requirements that small and medium enterprises then would be limited from participating. And I think what I would see from an ideal perspective is where you actually are able to check, are folks participating in a consensus framework? Are they members of something like the Instituto de Salud y Ética? All of these elements that then show, as you were highlighting, that there is a professional education component, that there is a commitment and an understanding. And if you can get to the ideal scenario where the consensus frameworks truly have that level of credibility we were discussing earlier, then you've got sort of that seal of approval. And I think then from a technical perspective, in terms of the point allocation when interpreting a bid, then you could apply the appropriate points there and be able to do that in a way that is not an onerous imposition or a big requirement. Some of the larger companies, some of the large pharmaceutical companies that are members of ePharma have extensive full-time staffs that are able to do this. And so we welcome anything that includes ethics and transparency, but we want to do it in a way that is cognizant of the fact that not everybody's going to have those resources. And at the end of the day, I keep coming back to patient outcomes and sustainable health systems. We want this to be a win-win scenario for all.
Patricia, I'd welcome your thoughts on that as well.
O que eu gostaria de comentar.
What I would like to say is that, yes, I do think it's extremely important for us to value the companies regardless of their size, and valuing the companies that are worried with robust quality systems and robust integrity and compliance systems and ethical conduct. What I would like to raise is the extremely important situation of having the facilitation towards these achievements. In Brazil, I would say that it is very expensive. It's very expensive so that small and medium enterprises can actually have access to, this level of education. So I think that the institute, the Health Ethics Institute, is a very big differential for us. We have access to information, instruction, courses, training that can help us a lot to be able to format this system inside the companies. But this needs to be more and more, spread so that we only have access to this information and this certification through companies that have a higher pay and bigger size. So sending knowledge like this, spreading knowledge is very important. The companies, most of the companies, and here I'm talking about serious companies. I'm not talking about people who are trying to, seize the moment. They want to become more and more ethical because this is prosperity. It means prosperity. When you work with ethics, you invest in your present, in your future, and in the maintenance of your business. The business can only thrive truly if it is funded with good practice roots. But this needs to be more accessible in terms of costs for the small and medium enterprises. So this is a message that I would like to relay, and I would like for our governments and our institutions, associations to consider.
Thank you. Director Gracia, what do you think of these options? Are they workable within a procurement system?
Yo creo que Creo que las reglas claras y permanentes, una institucionalidad.
I believe that the clear and transparent rules and the solid institutionality without variations really help regarding transparency and ethics.
En materias de salud pública,
Specifically considering public health care, it is really important to avoid requirements that do not contribute to the efficacy and safety of examinations and pharmaceutical items that are important. A lot of times we find ourselves with difficulties and we lose track of our goals, that all our discussions about these themes and others have to be focused on patients, on the people that will receive the final product of our work. That those are our patients. Regarding integrity and ethics, these are long-term pathways. Ethics is not built overnight. It is built bit by bit in a sustainable way in a country. And conducts of individuals and their different associations in a collective manner are being modified step by step and not overnight. Recently, I've heard about the creation of a health ethics institute because health ethics codes help a lot. The institutionalities are able to help a lot. And so the message I would like to highlight is that ethics may not be enforced by law. It is a long-term work that has to be educated step by step.
Thank you. I think Deputy Attorney General Fonseca?
Sim. Gostaria de acrescentar o seguinte.
Yes, I would like to add that ethics management is foreseen in our legislation. And the legislation is increasingly specific. When we move from legislation to action, obviously, it takes time. It takes maturity. We thought that big companies and government has always thought like that. We also thought at the Health Ethics Institute, we have always thought that large companies would provide improvements to develop the practical mechanisms of ethics and compliance management through SMEs or small partners and providers. The principle to look at your partner is a lot of times overlooked. We are disappointed in and frustrated with large companies, including foreign companies. This is much more a testimony and a perception, a personal perception, because a lot of large companies in certain jurisdictions still have that feeling that they can take advantage of the opportunity of a non-rigorous jurisdiction, so to speak. So unfortunately, we think, we are certain that ethics management, compliance management mechanisms depend on several actors. It has already been said here by several panelists, and that depends on us actors. We are convinced of that. But the government, at the same time, has to be present in the healthcare system with several roles. And sometimes the government is bad, but it's worse without it, so to speak. So we have a conscious, aware market. A part of the market is very aware, another not so much, and we still have the political issue of corruption, which is very prevalent in Brazil today. So that's a huge challenge. We would need a different reform for that. But anyways, we know how to improve. We have learned with the world, really. The OECD has guidelines. The technicians share with us the best practices. We teach the best practices. But this is a huge challenge. Obviously, all actors have not the same level of awareness and preparation, but we continue with our efforts. We continue with believing, and we truly hope that our ability to move from the principles to actions improves even more each day, because we know how to do that. We are sure about that.
Thank you very much. Well, I'm keeping an eye on the time here. I see we have very little left. So I want to give everyone just a couple of minutes to tell us, as we approach the summit, what initiatives in ethics and integrity in health procurement would you like to see the leaders consider to continue to promote this advancement in creating a culture of transparency in our health procurement systems? Rafael, if you'd go first, what would you like to see the leaders consider at the summit?
So I guess I'd like to see them consider a couple of different things. First, I think the pandemic has highlighted the importance of actually having healthcare in the summit agenda to begin with, right? We've had multiple summits where there really wasn't a ministerial, presidential level type, focus on healthcare, and so I think that's almost a given that the Biden White House and the administration are going to make that happen here next summer. But a couple of things that I would think would be interesting. One, there is a realization that kind of pooled procurement and government purchasing is here to stay. There are ways to do it correctly, and there are ways to screw it up. We don't need to specify who hasn't done it that well, but we all know examples of places where it hasn't happened well. And at the same time, when it does happen correctly, it increases competition, it increases access, and it makes the use of resources more efficient. So I think, getting smarter about how you do pooled procurement and having discussions around that so that you can actually have a more efficient use of spend and do it in a way that's ethical and transparent would be one. And then the second one, it sort of echoes something that I said earlier, which is at the end of the day, the system is becoming more sophisticated, digital tools, gene therapies, advanced therapeutics. We need to, up our game in terms of our discussion of, what the right answer is to ensure that you have ethical and transparent interactions. And unfortunately, bright line rules are often not the right answer.
Thank you. Patricia?
Bom, para encerrar, eu gostaria de mais uma vez dar os
Well, I would
parabéns
just like to congratulate everyone and also thank the organizers. This event represents a unity of different actors and bodies, and in my opinion is the best way to build a better society. The consensus framework is an excellent example and really helps to curb corruption and encourage good initiatives. because the union between civil society and the government, that union is what's going to build better countries and a better society that works towards those who are the focus of our work, human beings and the sick human beings. So our mission is enormous, because when we fail with the dissemination of corruption, sick people are going to die. So our role is essential. We have to be aware of what we want to build for the present and the future. And that depends on each and every one of us. And whatever possible, we have to do. That is our mission. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. Deputy Attorney General Fonseca?
Bom, eu diria como última mensagem.
Well, as a last message, I would like to mention that we have an inflation of laws. We have good regulations. We try to comply with all guidelines and recommendations of external partners like the OECD, for example. So my focus is much more simpler, so to speak. An annual revision, for example, of the Code of Ethics and Conduct for both companies and government. All entities of the government have a code of ethics, so that should be revised annually, and most importantly, of the mechanisms of enforcement of those codes. So our problem relates to enforcement. So we need that revision, and we need to interact with other partners so that we are able to learn together. Thank you.
Thank you. And Director Gracia, the final thoughts for the leaders at the summit.
Gracias. En la agenda legislativa del Congreso se están discutiendo.
In the legislative agenda in the Congress, some standards have been discussed that regulate the relation between the industry, specifically the pharmaceutical industry, with healthcare providers, in which is registered the transference of value in the sector, limiting, for example, the promotion or lobby. This final aspect is controlled by authorities and also by citizenship. So public servants have to inform their meetings and audiences that they conduct with vendors and lobbyists. Lastly, I would like to say something about the pandemic. Although we have flexibilized some administrative measures to supply faster the population with PPE and medications, we have to highlight the equal access to the whole population, regardless of insurance. I believe that in that regard, ethics in health was above any other interest or motivation in particular. So Kate, thank you so much for this opportunity. I hope that everyone has a great day.
Thank you. Well, I want to say thank you and gracias and obrigada to all of you for sharing your thoughts with us today and for that really great discussion. I think you've set out an ambitious agenda to build upon for the summit. I'd also like to thank the audience for their attention. Having been a part of this for so long, we won't mention quite how long. I can't tell you how much I look forward to the hemisphere's continued efforts to advance this ambitious agenda to the benefit of all patients and of all people through this Summit of the Americas and through many summits to come. So thank you again to the organizers and thank you again to my panelists. And I hope you all enjoy the rest of the forum.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kate, for and all panelists for really a tremendously insightful session on a topic that no doubt, as Kate and you and the panelists have said, is garnering significant attention amidst the COVID-19 pandemic and where there are tremendous opportunities to drive a high standard level playing field.